My name is Becca Davies, and I will be your host this evening. For those of you who don't know me, I'm an account executive for Visa, and I have the honor and privilege of working closely with the Cooperative Trust and partnering with AACUC to support the Crasher and Young Professional attendance at this year's Commitment to Change conversation series. A couple of housekeeping items before I introduce our speaker. Please make sure you're on mute unless you are sharing your thoughts and participating in conversation. Please also utilize the chat function to participate with discussions. We want to keep this super interactive, and also please note that we will be using breakout sessions as a part of our special event tonight. Lastly, a special thank you to our sponsors, our title sponsor, PSCU, program sponsor for Wednesday, FIS Global, and our young professional sponsor, Visa. Tonight, I'm excited to welcome to you our special event, DEI and Code Switching. Our guest speaker is Andrea Finley. Andrea is a native of Augusta, Georgia, but has made her home in upstate South Carolina, working for SC Telco Federal Credit Union as the Financial Wellness Coordinator. As a CUNA certified financial counselor, she has extensive experience creating financial literacy programs and frameworks for both credit union members and the members of her community. As a mentor for the Crasher program, she is an advocate for financial inclusion and is a DEI enthusiast. Please help me welcome Andrea.
Thank you, Becca. First, I want to say thank you. Well, first of all, thanks, Becca. That was a great introduction. I'm very excited to be with you all here this evening. And I'm very thankful. I want to take the time to thank AACUC for inviting me to speak about something that I'm oh so passionate about. So here we go, guys. All right, so today I wanted to give you a little bit of background information about diversity, equity, and inclusion, including some definitions. And then we're going to take a deep dive into code switching and covering. So to get started, we're going to ask you all a poll question. It's just a very simple question. Are you familiar with either the term code switching or covering? And we'll look at these answers a little bit later, but get started with that question for you all. All right, so while that poll is going on, I do want to address the elephant in the room. So talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, it's not easy, right? And often, sometimes it's just uncomfortable. But why are those discussions sometimes frustrated? Sometimes people may feel attacked, people get defensive, there's a lot of emotions involved, but let's take a closer look as to why that may be. I want you to picture your credit union executive team, so your C-suite, if you will. What are some roles that come to mind? Well, for me, when I think of union, I'm thinking of CEO, CFO, CEO, I think I said that, the VP of marketing, or, you know, VP of this and that, right? I've even heard the term VP of awesomeness, which has been my favorite title so far. But when you think about these roles, there's often a finite number, right? There's not unlimited CEOs, there can only be one. There's not unlimited VP of marketing. And so these terms or these roles are also known as what we call seats at the table. And oftentimes when specifically members of a marginalized group talk about gaining seats at the table, some other people may assume this means they have to give up their seat. So immediately there's friction, people are uncomfortable, and it's just not a good experience for many people. But it doesn't have to be that way. So what is DEI? Well, it's the acronym for diversity, equity, and inclusion. So let's take a quick look at what these actually mean. Simply put, diversity refers to our differences that we each have. Equity refers to fairness and just overall fairness. And inclusion refers to our work environment. And I don't know if you heard the commercial earlier, but there was the quote of diversity is bringing someone to the, or being invited to the party, and inclusion is being asked to dance. But this one I found is actually my favorite. Diversity is being invited to the party. Inclusion is being a member of the planning committee. Let's take a closer look at diversity. Like I said, it refers to our many differences. Some of these differences we can see immediately, right? So just by looking at someone, you may be able to tell their gender, whether or not they're physically able, sometimes their age, and their race. But there's also some other characteristics that we have that make us unique that aren't as easy to see just from physically looking at someone. Sometimes you kind of have to get to know someone to see these differences. So these may be heritage, life experiences, sexual orientation, family status. The list goes on and on at the bottom of the iceberg there. So now I want to shift the focus to the workplace, right? So let's look at these characteristics through the lens of the workplace, because this is a professional conference, right? So we are here. So organization differences include, it could be management status. It could also be your work location and seniority. And I like to draw special attention to this wheel because the differences here that are pictured, we collectively represent many of these different segments within this wheel. Yet here we are for a common purpose. Equity. Simply put, equity means fairness by making sure that everyone has access to an equal outcome. You can see there in the picture, equality is not quite the same. Equity, everyone may need something slightly different to get the equal outcome. And sometimes that means putting in work. It's not always easy. To further understand equity, we should all ask ourselves this question. Would my path to success have been easier or harder if I were female, of color, disabled, Muslim, a member of the LGBTQ community, or other? You fill in the blank. Until we can all answer that none of these things have affected our success, then there's still work to be done with DEI. And newsflash, there will always be work to be done with DEI. Diversity, equity, and inclusion is working to take away the competitive advantage that some of us may have over others. To unlock the benefits of diversity, employees with diverse backgrounds must feel included. Inclusion refers to a work environment where everyone can participate, be heard, feel valued, contribute, you name it, right? You have to feel very comfortable. One roadblock to diversity, or excuse me, one roadblock to unlocking the benefits of diversity could be ourselves. Going back to our poll earlier, you mind sharing the results? All right. Ooh, we're neck and neck. So 55% of you said, yes, you are familiar with either the term code switching or covering, and 45% of you said no, and that's okay. So simply put, those are terms for when we downplay our differences, when we feel insecure, or when we feel like we don't belong. The definition of code switching is the use of one dialect, register, accent, or language variety over another, depending on social and cultural context to project a specific identity, or the modifying of one's behavior, appearance, etc., to adapt to different sociocultural norms, aka code switching. Here's another way of looking at it. Every person belongs to one or more cultures. In the United States, the dominant culture is defined by those who are white, straight, and male. Members of the non-dominant culture often downplay the ways they differ from the dominant culture. Psychologists refer to this behavior as covering. It's actually very commonplace. You can see here by the charts that 61% of people in the workplace engage in some form of covering. And you can take an even closer look to see who the 61% may belong to. How do they identify themselves? Whether they be LGBTQ plus individuals, women of color, women, Hispanics, African Americans, you name it, a lot of people do it. So covering takes 4 different forms: appearance, affiliation, association, and advocacy. I'm going to break down these 4 types and give examples. And y'all, I'm a storyteller, so be prepared. All right, so appearance-based covering is when individuals alter their self-presentation, including grooming, attire, and mannerisms to blend in. For example, African American women straighten our hair to meet social norms or the expectations at work, right? I remember when I made the grand announcement to my mom that I was going to lock my hair. I'm getting dreadlocks, Mom. And she was not happy. She was actually scared for me. She said, "Are you sure you want to do that? What about your career?" She was really, frankly, worried for me in the future of my career, and would I be stuck where I was? Now, to some people, this may seem ridiculous, but for a lot of us, we know this to be true and a valid concern. You see, it's currently legal, that's right, legal with an L, to discriminate against a person in the workplace and schools because of their natural or protective hairstyle. And this is legal in all states except for just 7. So right now there's currently a bill in Congress, and I saw it in the chat there, about the Crown Act, right? It's called the Crown Act, that calls for making hair discrimination illegal. It's just a bill, it's not a law, we're not there yet. So for some immigrants, appearance-based covering may mean speaking without an accent, right? You don't speak your home language. You definitely try to assimilate as much as possible. For appearance, also for women, including white women, right? In the 1980s, women started adapting fashion that helped them blend into the mainstream, working with men. So shoulder pads came about, and we still use them today. Pantsuits too. That's exactly right. Black men. Oh, I love our black men. But our black men tend to dress very nice. Look around, right? Oftentimes, they're the best dressed person in the room. But why is it? Is it because they love fashion? Maybe. But for many, it's a way to present themselves to the world without being seen as a threat. Sometimes code switching is simply necessary for survival. I remember listening to one of our commitment to change calls through AACUC a few weeks ago and hearing Kevin Martin explain his experience shortly after the death of George Floyd. Because, like many of us, Kevin was working from home. His credit union had adopted a casual dress code. But one day, Kevin had to go into the office. And he shared that he contemplated wearing a suit for his commute and making sure he had his business cards on hand just in case he got pulled over during his commute. He went on to explain that by dressing nicer and showing his business cards that included his title of management, he may have a safer outcome than if he were just his casual self. And by safer outcome, I mean coming home alive. Affiliation-based covering occurs when individuals avoid behaviors widely associated with their identity, or to downplay some negative stereotypes associated with their identity. For example, a woman might resist the urge to discuss childcare obligations for fear of being viewed as a caregiver and less committed to work. Reflecting back on my own life, I told you I love to tell stories. I didn't always volunteer the information that my parents were immigrants from Jamaica, because I quickly learned that I would often be met with questions and comments like, oh, wow, they must smoke a lot of weed. Do they smoke weed at your house? Can you smoke weed? No, not okay. I went to school with a lot of kids who grew up upper class. I went to private school. And I remember avoiding talking about where I lived, what side of town I lived on, or even inviting people who I considered friends to my house for sleepovers out of fear of being judged. Covering could also be, who you're associated with. Associated-based covering occurs when individuals avoid contact with other group members. For example, a gay person may refrain from bringing his same-sex partner to a work function, so he's not seen as being too gay. Someone may avoid joining cancer groups because they didn't want to draw attention to their medical status, disability, or flexible arrangements. Their employer may avoid giving them longer term or higher profile projects because they assume the person can't handle it. So if you know all of that may be coming down the pipeline, just don't say anything at all. Advocacy-based covering spotlights how much individuals stick up for their group. We all know it's election year, and especially during election years, it is hard not to offend anyone who may be a Republican or a Democrat. As such, you tend to downplay your own beliefs. Thinking back to my parents, before they were granted citizenship, I remember vividly them not speaking out publicly about anything political because of the likelihood of them hearing, well, if you don't like it here, just go back where you came from. So now that I've defined the different types of code switching and covering, ask yourself, do you code switch? And if you do, when, and why? I really want you to think about this. So do some internal inventory, right? Do you do it? When do you do it? And why it is that you think you do it. I know for me, I do it because it's comfortable, right? It helps me blend in. And frankly, it helps more people of color get a seat at the table. But I want to caution you about the dangers of code switching and covering, because when we diminish these pieces of ourselves, our differences, our unique qualities, our identities, businesses lose the benefit of our unique perspectives, right? And we know the business case for DE&I is strong. It doesn't make sense not to do it, right? But if we're all covering, how is that going to work out? We spend so much energy trying to hide parts of ourselves that it distracts us from our work. Are we really giving our work 100% when it's like, oh, is my hair just right? Or am I dressed nice? Oh, I can't talk about this, or I can't talk about that. What happens when you've gotten a seat at the table, but you cover to match who's already in the room? What effect could that have on everyone else who's striving to make it to the table? So I want to stop here for a second. And I know I asked a lot in the last few minutes there as far as things to consider. And I can't quite read the chat because I'm trying to pay attention here, but I see it's popping in there. And so all of that energy that you have, I want you to put it into your breakout sessions. So we're going to break up into slightly smaller groups. We're going to give you 15 minutes to discuss. And some of the things I want to share or want you to think about is, think about your own. Do you code switch? When do you do it? What are some potential dangers that could come out of it? And how can we support each other when we see each other code switching? Do we need to call each other out? Do we need to say, hey, I'm here for you? I don't know. I don't have the answers. That's why I'm turning it over to you all. Y'all are a bright group. So let's get this discussion going. I'll try to pop in here and there when I can, but we're going to give you 15 minutes. And I'm eager to hear back once we get back together. I would like someone to share if you don't mind. Thank you. spokesperson.
Bye.
Thanks, guys.
All right, welcome back, everyone. So, how'd it go? Anybody eager to share? We had a really good discussion in group 2, and someone said they didn't want their breakout session to end, but I would like to open the floor up if anybody wants to unmute themselves, and you can either share or talk about some solutions that you may have come up with, or dangers of code switching. Do you even realize you're code switching? That was a common theme in our group. So we'll anybody jump in to speak? And go for it.
See, what were we group 7, Kevin? I think.
Oh, I didn't see a number.
Okay.
We were group Larry.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I started off, and I told everyone I did not realize over these years that looks like I was code switching. I'm not sure how much covering I did, but certainly code switching. I wasn't as familiar with the term, so all that code switching I was doing, it was not intentionally, but doing it just the same. So, and so I think someone said it was sometimes it's a matter of survival or trying to fit in. But for me, it was probably more of not being seen as a threat or any way, being an African American man, particularly in the workplace. And always, sometimes when you want to maybe kind of express yourself, you keep it calm so no one takes anything or misinterpret my feelings or my attitude or anything like that. So that was me, and that was sort of the theme of our group as well.
This is Melanie. We talked in group 8, and we got to cover a lot of topics. We talked about covering and code switching, and learned that there's a lot of different ways that some of us are code switching. And I was really glad that our group created a safe environment to talk about those things too. It's happening more than we realize, just based on what folks are comfortable with. We talked about LGBT. We talked about race, we talked about age, and one of the comments I is that someone mentioned, as they developed more in their career and showed people what they had to offer, they didn't feel like they needed to code switch anymore, and how there's some of that pressure too when you're earlier on in your career as well, when people don't know you and you don't have trust or allies built up in your co-working space as well. But yeah, we covered a lot of different things there, and we also decided we were all allies in the group too for some of our folks in there too. So just creating a supportive community, even if you don't have an ally in your credit union, reminding us that there are allies all around this entire group here that we can.
That's right. That's awesome. Anyone else?
I'll be super fast, Andrea, I promise. But I just want to say, China, you're going to rule the world one day, I promise. Don't let anybody look down on you, girl. You got it. You got it going on. You're going to take over wherever you're at.
Thank you. Andrea, I'll chime in. Our group had a really great discussion so quick, we didn't want it to end. But we were saying the reason to elevate diverse voices comes out of those situations of when, folks feel as though they are being silenced, or they feel as though they have to code switch. How great is it when we elevate those voices and let folks know in a welcoming atmosphere, and also increasing the amount of colors, ages, races that are invited to the table, then the pressure to code switch actually goes down, because you have more folks that are understanding your perspective. So it doesn't come across as being inauthentic. It actually comes across as being a part of the resource and being a part of a sounding board and actually having a valuable voice. So that's why it is so important to make sure that you have a diverse, like you were saying before, C-suite, so that a lot of those things can get done and folks feel so much more included because there are so many people that look just like them.
That's awesome.
From group 3, we also, I think we could have gone on. There's just so much wisdom that was shared in our group. One thing that I would share was just that, code switching can be mentally and emotionally draining, but the experiences we have of code switching helps us to also build connections and really contribute to our groups. And those are real leadership characteristics. And perhaps also there's benefit to maybe all leaders adopting some level of code switching where we are centering, trying to connect with other folks and to understand the different experiences. Granted, it's a lot of work right now, and I appreciate that Melanie shared just like the intersectional perspective experiences when it comes to code switching. But I think, also about race and also gender, especially with women of color having to do a lot of the code switching. Not that other folks don't, but just really, I think it adds to our resilience and our leadership skills.
That's awesome. And I know some of you don't know what groups you were in, so I'm trying to make sure we got at least one person from each group. So if there are any missing groups, please do share. This is great. I don't want this to end.
So for group 6, we're going to have Cedric Cherry speak, but he can't get off mute for some reason. So we were talking about, we had a question actually, if there were any majority, minority credit unions as part of this group, and do you find yourself code switching?
Ooh, good question.
Because we talked about even that kind of fine line between code switching and professionalism, and also just the ability to that comfort level with someone. So if I'm with a friend or I'm with a department, no matter what denomination or anything else is going on, is I'm going to speak more familiar versus I'm going to go formal if it's with someone I don't know, I'm not comfortable with, an audience. As Cedric said, better safe than sorry, because we don't know the audience. But we did have that question if anyone is in a majority African American or Hispanic credit union, and do they find themselves code switching there?
So my name is Adrian Johnson, and I am in a majority minority institution. So I work for MECU Credit Union in Baltimore, Maryland. So we're a $1.3 billion organization. And I've been there 23 years, and I've been in a position for 10. And of course, I've seen that the evolution from more white folks and now to more black folks. And so as I was saying in our group earlier, I didn't know what covering and code switching was, but no, I've never found myself doing that. And I've just been real. People react to me differently because I talk differently as a black man in their eyes. But that's because where I was raised. And so it wasn't anything I was trying to do on purpose. It's just me. And so I would say no to that question. And then of course I'm old now, so and so that doesn't matter to me, And so, but throughout my career, I've had people that talk to me on the phone, and then when they see me, it's like that can't be the guy, And so, so you just keep it moving. Oh, the other thing I wanted to bring up, because we had somebody in our group who, really stressed out over this thing or causes some anxiety. Seek some help. If you need a third party or a therapist or somebody who's can talk on the subject that you're having stress and anxiety about, you need an unbiased, honest dialogue with that person, and because it's a mindset. And so, if you're a young person, you got a lot of years of work. That's a lot to deal with, and so you want to get that out as soon as you can.
Thank you. I saw in the chat there's the topic of professionalism and who defines it. So that's I know, thinking back to the Crown Act that I mentioned, a lot of that has been defined as, well, your hair is unprofessional. And so how do we take a look at that and ask those questions? Is it really unprofessional? What is deemed professional? Is it determined by that dominant culture? So those are the tough questions that we need to ask. But yeah, that's just great discussion. Thank you guys. Anything else here? I think we're rocking and rolling. We have probably time for about 2 more.
This conversation, I've just been listening and thinking, because there's a lot to think about here. And so as I'm reading down the list of, different ways that we might cover, right? And I'm looking at these and I'm saying appearance, affiliation, association, advocacy, and saying, well, the only one that I really identify with maybe on a regular basis is advocacy, and just realizing how that speaks to privilege, that there's only one area of that I might identify with, in particular on a regular basis, which is not to say that perhaps it doesn't happen in some ways, but just to recognize that, like, I think white people have a responsibility to look around the room and understand that, like, hey, if there's a room full of people that look just like us, there are people in that room who don't look like us, who aren't from the same culture, whatever that might be, who don't hold the institutional power, maybe is a better way to say it. That's when we have to step up and be advocates. So I think it was just listening to these stories and then realizing, yeah, I don't have these experiences. Why is that? It's just a reminder that there's a lot of work to do there. There's a lot of work.
I will say also that I think it's been really helpful, and I don't know if this is helpful to anyone in the room, but I'm really glad that we have individuals on our staff that do come from areas that are willing to speak up about it and help to educate folks on it. Because, maybe it's a little bit easier now that these conversations are always happening, but when the hair conversation was hard and that wasn't something that was commonplace, and we didn't have a Crown Act, and we didn't have different things going on where people didn't realize that was unprofessional. And this happened before I was even there, but that those folks said, hey, you might not realize it, but here's how this comes off. We just started a DEI team, and we had someone talked about a CEO in one of our groups that maybe the CEO at that credit union was kind of slow to act after the George Floyd and the other incidents that came. And, we had something similar at first, was just, hey, we just want to figure out how to respond. And we had individuals from that community be able to speak up and say, here's why acting now is important. It doesn't have to be perfect. You just need to do it. And so I just want to encourage folks in the room that, folks need the learning experience too, and to it, not covering that up.
Thank you.
I'm curious, is the ultimate goal to just, eliminate code switching completely? Because I feel like there's different levels of code switching, and some of them can, kind of very closely correlate to using tact or speaking tactically when you're having conversations. Where do we draw those lines? One of the conversations we had in our group was talking about, it's important for you to, just to say it plainly, keep it real. Well, the real me has variations too. And I can't give you 100% all the time. Sometimes you need 80, sometimes you need 90, sometimes you need 1 because you don't understand. But I would like to hear, if anyone has an opinion on, the levels of code switch.
Hey, Davon. I'd say this. I don't know that it's something that's ever going to go away. And I did see somebody kind of type that in there a little bit ago, that I don't know that, because people are going to bring their insecurities, and your insecurities do make you shut down at times. So I think there's that level of code switching where it's like your own personal insecurity that just kind of keeps you from going that. But I know for me, I was completely unaware, and my group kind of heard a little bit about it a second ago, but I was completely unaware coming into GAC this year that that people of color dealt with half the things that they deal with. Having to figure out what you're going to wear to work that morning. I'll show up at work with my t-shirt wrinkled sometimes because it's what I found on the floor. I've never had to think through that deeply. So I think there's levels of code switching that absolutely need to be destroyed from the roots of it. And that's the ones that go around with racism or kind of things like that. The Kevin story earlier about running to work really quick and then putting on a suit. As a white guy, I've never had to do that. I've never had to think about what I was going to run into. But then you have your people that are still going to code switch just because they're insecure about something or they're going to hide something for a while. And you're never really going to get that to officially go away because people are people and we are flawed. But the truth is, when it comes to making a decision about someone over something they cannot change, like their skin color, like their origin of birth or any kind of thing like that, that's the kind of code switching that has got to just be completely eliminated at the roots. And it starts, and I said this in my last group, and I will hurry, I promise. I talk a lot, I apologize. But it starts in allies. It starts in allies. It starts in white people recognizing that there's a problem and coming home from GAC 2020 and saying, I will not be silent anymore. I can't stand to the side anymore. You can do what you want. I posted a Black Lives Matter status a little bit after George Floyd situation happened, and my dad still hasn't spoken to me since I posted that status. You know what? It's a risk that you have to take, though, because there's a problem and it's got to be destroyed at the roots. And honestly, the only people that can destroy it at the roots are the people who planted it, and that's where it's at. I'm done. I'm sorry. I'll apologize, guys.
Thank you, Casey. No, that was incredible. Oh, Kevin's got his hand up. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, I raised it before Casey went, but now that he's gone, I want to say,
sorry.
Casey, I appreciate you, and we support you. I was going to just mention in our group, we talked about how important representation is, right? So at various levels of society, at various levels of our companies, and when you are at a place of influence, being yourself, challenging the status quo, decreasing the code switching, right? And the reason why I think it's so important is because it gives permission for everybody else who either identifies with you, looks like you, for them to be themselves as well. And that's so important. And so, for those who are in positions of influence, know that you're being watched, know that people are taking cues from you. So if you always in the code switch and it's always, you never use the vernacular, or you would never ever wear your natural hair or whatever the topic is, you're giving them the signal that they shouldn't either.
That's incredible. You're right. Becca said giving people permission to be themselves is so important, and that's exactly right. Whether or not, so the question of whether or not the intention is to completely eliminate code switching, I can't really say yes or no. I really just wanted to bring this subject up to everyone's attention because I recently learned about it in the last 2 to 3 years. And I'm not saying that covering in code switching is wrong, right? So please don't leave here saying Andrea said it's wrong. It's not, or that you shouldn't do it. We can all agree that there are certain times where you just have to do what you have to do, right?
Oh,
but yes. Oh,
this is
sorry.
Marcus.
Yes.
I have a lot of great ladies that help me in the credit union that I'm at. And I was not knowledgeable of code switching, and I've never done it before, which is probably a problem. But either way, I think sometimes it's necessary. This is big for me because I'm not a code switcher. Really not. If you know me, I'm not. However, I have seen things that Maurice Smith has done that probably would not have been done if you were not willing to do that. So, I'm considering code switching.
Thank you for sharing, Marcus. And you're right. Sometimes it is necessary. Think about all the pioneers that have come before us. Someone had to lay that brick, and it might have had to have some code switching involved. But as we discussed, you know, as the table changes, as representation comes, then the need to code switch is less and less. So the ultimate goal is for everyone to be able to bring their true authentic selves, and so everyone can benefit from DEI. That is my time. I'm going to hand it over to Becca. Thank you guys so much for joining me. I know it's late, but thanks for hanging in there anyway, and hopefully continue this conversation as you go on. Thank you guys.
Good. Very good.
Thanks, Andrea, so much. And thank you all. It's been an excellent session. I've learned so much. I hope you all have too. And hope you all have a great night. Tomorrow, the general session is Road to Financial Equity, and it will start at 3 p.m. Eastern. See you then, and hope everyone has a great night. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, Becca.